One of the most interesting ancient Near Eastern documents that we can use to understand the context of the Bible is called the Cyrus Cylinder. The Cyrus Cylinder. It is of particular relevance to the exilic period, the so-called exilic period, the 500s BCE, the 6th century. And the question I want to ask very briefly here is this. Has the Bible been influenced in some way by this document, the Cyrus Cylinder? There's one application that I think is very commonly made in answer to this question, but there's another one that I think is also intriguing that people make less often that I also want to suggest. So there's my teaser. Now, backing up, who is this Cyrus the Great character? Well, Cyrus was the king of the renewed Persian Empire. He reigned from, I think, the 550s through the 530s BCE. And in the year 539 BCE, or thereabouts, he marches into Babylon and overthrows the Babylonians and overthrows their king Nabonidus. And thus the Persians become the great rulers of the ancient Near Eastern world. The Persians took a different approach to empire ruling in the ancient Near Eastern world, whereas before them the Assyrians had come in and just leveled cities to the ground and installed vassal kings and tried to really micromanage smaller kingdoms like Israel and Judah and other groups in various ways. And the Babylonians had done a kind of a slash and burn sort of campaign as well, maybe just a lot of slashing and burning, and really not even too much else. The Persians seem to have done something different. They seem to have supported local populations. They seem to have encouraged exiles from Babylonian destruction, for example, to return to their land. I don't know that it's quite right to say that the Persians were some kind of like imperial human rights organization or something like that. There was a way of talking about the Persians in an earlier generation of scholarship where people wanted to talk about the Persians this way. And in fact, some people had even called the Cyrus Cylinder something like the earliest human rights document or something like that. That's probably a little anachronistic and probably not quite the flair, quite the flavor. But it's interesting enough to recognize that the Persians at this time period had a different approach to ruling their subjugated populations. They ruled over a far-flung, huge, wide empire. They were famous for their clashes with Greece, of course, all the way down to Egypt, throughout the Near East, east and west and south and north. And so in order to reign over an empire like that, you've got to be really effective with taxes. You've got to have local populations cooperating with you, things like this. So the Persians definitely did things in a different way. They were built different as an empire. This Cyrus Cylinder is a super fascinating document. I don't have a picture of it to hold up here. It's not very interesting visually. I've got a link to it down below in the video description, and the British Museum, where this archaeological artifact has been really almost since its discovery for about 150 years, has a really great website on this document, a translation, all kinds of stuff. So please click there and get lost in the wonder of it all. Basically, it's a smallish cylinder-shaped object with cuneiform writing all around it. And it probably wasn't meant for visual display. It was maybe even meant to be buried as part of like an archival foundation to a city wall or something like that, I think archaeologists think. It's written in Babylonian language, Babylonian Akkadian, and in cuneiform. And it's written from just an absolutely fascinating perspective and tells an absolutely fascinating story, which goes a little something like this. Cyrus claims that the last Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was not a great worshiper of the Babylonian god, Marduk. And because Nabonidus was negligent in his worship of the Babylonian god Marduk, because his failure to be a great patron of Marduk and the Marduk priesthood caused the New Year's festival to get disrupted and all kinds of religious things to go wrong, Cyrus claimed. Because of all that, Marduk cried out to Cyrus, the king of another empire, and said, hey, why don't you come on in here and overthrow this loser, Nabonidus, who does not worship me, who doesn't know how to worship me. You be the ruler. I read here from the Context of Scripture volume from the translation of the Cyrus Cylinder by Mordecai Kogan. An excerpt sounds a little something like this. Upon hearing their cries, the cries of the Babylonians, the Lord of the gods, Marduk, became furiously angry, and he left their borders, and the gods who lived among them forsook their dwellings, angry that he had brought them into Babylon. This king Nabonidus, angry that he had brought these other gods in there. Marduk turned toward all the habitations that were abandoned and all the people of Sumer and Akkad who had become corpses. He was reconciled and had mercy upon them. He surveyed and looked throughout all the lands, searching for a righteous king whom he would support. Who will this king be? He called out his name, Cyrus, king of Anshan. He pronounced his name to be king over all the world. He, Marduk, made the land of Gutium and all the Umanmanda bow in submission at his feet. And he, Cyrus, shepherded with justice and righteousness all the black-headed people over whom he, Marduk, had given him, Cyrus, victory. Marduk, the great lord, guardian of his people, looked with gladness upon Cyrus's good deeds and upright heart. He ordered him to march to his city, Babylon. He sent him on the road to Babylon, and like a companion and friend, he went at his side. He made him enter his city, Babylon, without fighting or battle. He saved Babylon from hardship. He delivered Nabonidus, the king who did not revere him, into his hands. What a magnificent piece of propaganda this is. Oh, you gotta love it. Just the religious claim, the audacity of it. And yet, the people of Babylon, perhaps, particularly the Marduk priesthood, must have been very eager to receive a message like this. Because here was somebody, at least claiming to respect their traditions, their city, and wanting to restore it, not just burn it to the ground and end the worship of Marduk. No, not at all. Not at all is this claim. One interesting thing about this cylinder is that I think this was a message made to travel. I think we can assume, based on other archaeological findings, pieces of this inscription in different copies found elsewhere, we can assume that this was a message meant for dissemination. It's almost like the way in modern warfare that maybe an attacking group will before doing the explosive bombing, will do leaflet bombing of an area. So maybe this is one parallel way to think of what the Persians were doing. They were kind of like leaflet bombing the area beforehand with this message. Don't worry, Marduk has commanded this. He's coming in and he's going to do all these things. And the inscription goes on to describe all these wonderful things that Cyrus will do, that Marduk has commanded, just all kinds of stuff. And Cyrus is going to rule, and there are going to be offerings, and everything is going great. We know that the Persians also spread their messages in writing, not just in cuneiform, but also in Aramaic, a language that would have been a kind of lingua franca of the Near Eastern world by the Persian period. And in fact, these Aramaic copies of Persian inscriptions even reached as far away as Egypt. We know because part of the documents that were found in and around Elephantine, Egypt, far in South Egypt, presumably, was actually a copy of the Behistun inscription, which is an inscription from a later Persian king that was apparently copied in all kinds of languages, including Aramaic, and disseminated throughout this world. And so although we don't have tons and tons and dozens and thousands of copies, I think that we can assume those things actually did exist and that people, regular people living throughout the empire, might have actually had real access to these documents. So it is not crazy at all to think that in a book like the book of Ezra, when the book of Ezra opens and he's actually just quoting from proclamations made by King Cyrus of Persia, this is how the book of Ezra opens. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, here's the written edict. When he claims this, it's not crazy to think that he's actually looking at a real written document. And throughout the middle of the book of Ezra, you have some of the longest Aramaic passages in the Hebrew Bible. These decrees of Cyrus and these letters going back and forth in the middle of the book. In chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, kind of in that zone. A lot of this is actually in Aramaic. It is the longest portion of the Bible that's not in Hebrew. It's in Aramaic. So it may be that some of this Aramaic is literally from letters that are literally archival. So this is one way that actually biblical scholars and readers of the Bible could see the Bible being influenced by, if not the Cyrus Cylinder itself, the kind of literary culture of Persian kings who did disseminate writing and really did make proclamations like the one Ezra claims. I mean, this is the letter or the edict in Ezra chapter 1, verse 2. Thus says King Cyrus of Persia. I mean, listen to the language here. It's fascinating. Thus says King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem. Notice the language reflected. Cyrus, claiming another nation's God, commanded him to do a thing for that other nation, right? So whatever you make of that theologically and whatever truth claim you want to put to that, of course, Christian readers of the Bible like myself would want to say yes. And in this moment, this is like the true God reaching out to Cyrus, and these other things are whatever they are. But this is a reinterpretation of history, and it's an affirmation of God's activity in the world. Okay, however you want to see it, whether you see it like that or some other way, you can at least see the reflection of that rhetoric of the Cyrus Cylinder here, in that you have this Persian king doing apparently what he did with a lot of different kingdoms and groups, saying, your God told me to tell you that, I'm the emperor for this time, for this place. So Ezra's a place where you just see this, and Ezra has these letters, and it's just, it's really interesting. It's great to see. And apparently the Persians really did do this, send exiled groups of people home and have them rebuild their temples. Why would they do that? Just out of the goodness of their hearts? No, not for the Persians. Of course, the biblical theological claim is that he does this in order to benefit God's people because God has commanded it. There you go. For the Persians, of course, you have a different kind of plane of action where they're thinking about how to manage and run an empire. And it's easier for them to run an empire if local groups return to their place, not trying to have all kinds of rebellions and stuff in exile, and build temples and solidify their identity in their local place. And even theologically, for Christian Bible readers or for Jewish readers who are engaged in this kind of theology, I don't think it's so crazy to see two levels of historical action going on here. We even have something like this in the Joseph story back in Genesis. Recall there that the brothers, they throw Joseph down in the well and they sell him into slavery. And when he's able to confront them again, he says, well, you did this for this reason, but God actually had a plan. And so there are different levels of things working. So I don't think that's such a wild claim on Christian theological grounds, nor do I think Christians have to be afraid of an interpretation, which is like, wow, this seems to mirror the propaganda that Cyrus himself was giving. It really does. There's one more place, though, I promised I would say one more lesser spoken about place where I think the rhetoric of the Cyrus Cylinder is kind of apparent, and that's in the book of Isaiah, particularly in the middle of Isaiah, what scholars sometimes call Second Isaiah. These chapters, 40 through 66, or in this case, 40 through 55, chapters that seem to speak very directly to the situation in the Babylonian exile. Chapter 45 begins this way of Isaiah. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, his Mashiach in Hebrew, his Messiah. Thus, the word there in Hebrew is mashach, means to smear with oil. So the Mashiach as a noun is one who's smeared with oil, the anointed. This is royal terminology. Spectacular language here to use of a foreign king, Cyrus. Thus says the Lord to his Messiah, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and strip kings of their robes, to open doors before him and the gates shall not be closed. I will go before you and level the mountains. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and riches hidden in secret places so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. That phrase, call you by your name, is a specific phrase from the Cyrus Cylinder. He says that Marduk called Cyrus by his name, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think here we're hearing the language of the Cyrus Cylinder. But the prophet here is taking it in a very different direction. Of course, it's not Marduk, it's the Lord, Yahweh. And it's for the release of these captives in Babylon, an historical thing that we really do know that the Persians did do. Now, how would Isaiah or this prophetic school, let's say, if it's descendants of Isaiah living in exile, how would they have gotten a message like this? I don't know, maybe in the pre-war leaflet bombing that I mentioned earlier. If they're living in exile, they must have heard messages like this coming from Cyrus. And it was indeed after 539 BCE that these exiles would have been encouraged to return home. And indeed, just a couple of decades later, they were back there, according to the book of Ezra at least, rebuilding the temple, maybe by between 520 and 515 BCE. So there's a lot of good history here, I think, for Bible readers and for Christians looking for historical connections and to see the Bible validated in a historical sense. I think there's some really good stuff here. I realize that for some people it might feel unnerving to think that, maybe the proclamation of a foreign king or that this other document might have influenced the Bible and its language we can see reflected in texts like not only Ezra, which claims to be direct letters from Cyrus, but also this prophetic proclamation kind of echoed in here. And there's more that could be said about that if you keep reading the chapter. I'll put some links down below to scholars who have written about this, so I'm not just making this up. If I were the first person to notice that the book of Isaiah had maybe sounded like the Cyrus Cylinder, I would have definitely written that paper or that book years ago. But other people have come to this conclusion too. I think, though, that we need not be thrown off by this idea. We just have to see, as Isaiah does, as Ezra and Nehemiah do, that history for the faithful is actually working on multiple planes at the same time, multiple levels. I realize that too, though, that for secular readers, it's just like, well, clearly these small kingdoms like Judah, like Yehud, they just kind of got excited and they copied the rhetoric of the Persian king. Yeah, I mean, I get that perspective. But certainly that's not the Bible's theological claim about the ultimate source of inspiration for releasing these exiles back to the land and for helping them to rebuild the temple. They attribute it to God.